So today we want to talk about arguably one of the most challenging things that a tech director, tech team has to do. So we're recording this on May 19th, which for most schools in the United States means that there's a week, maybe 10 days left in the school year. For those of us further in the north, a little bit longer. And so everybody is turning their attention to how are we going to collect all of our devices. And I am literally in this position. So this year I have been the part-time Chromebook admin for a school just down the street. And school ends the 30th, and I got to get all my devices back. So I am interested and somewhat terrified by what I'm going to see when I collect these. We've done quite a bit of repairs and things, and we'll get into that. But I think we're running about 15% repair rate, which is pretty normal for a middle school deployment, but higher than I would like. But I'm terrified because I am pretty sure that there's a lot of damage that has not been reported. Like I got kids walking around with no space bars and hinges that are wobbling, and they just, I don't know, didn't feel like turning it in and let me know. So we got to come up with a plan to collect these devices, communicate that, get them inventory. Like we got a lot of work to do over the summer. So I know there are a lot of schools in similar situations, and this is the time to put that plan in place. So that's kind of our focus here and what we want to talk about. Certainly best practices that all schools can use. And then, I mean, Dean and Jeff are VIZOR experts, so they'll throw in some ways that VIZOR could help you if you don't have a good plan, a good system in place. Definitely some tools that can assist you. So I want to start before collection. So we're teaching, we're doing our exams. What guys do you recommend that schools start thinking about the few weeks, the month before they need to collect things? How are we getting ourselves organized for this collection?
Yeah, I tend to think about three areas in terms of device collection. Having an accurate inventory, communicating, and where possible, automating. The month before, then we're in the eye of the storm really at the moment in terms of device collections. There's some really interesting posts on social media, Reddit, in terms of frustrated media specialists.
I bet.
Trying to claw devices back. And I think to that point, then now is a good time not only to plan for the next month, but to plan for the summer. And what are you going to do to make sure you don't have this problem when you're distributing devices at the beginning of the next school year? And what can we do better this time next year so we're not venting in Reddit groups and things like that when it comes to this time next year? So I would say take stock, literally, I guess, in some cases, but have a look at what you're doing at the moment and see what can be improved. And this is a great time of the year to do that and put a plan in place during the summer. So specifically now, I think communication is important. Reaching out to teachers and students and families to let them know when devices are expected back, what state you're hoping to get those devices. So do you want the chargers back, the cases, even the boxes? What's the expectation for returning these devices? When do they need to be returned and where do they need to be returned? I think in many ways, the earlier you can do that, then better. And in fact, even at the beginning of the school year, starting that conversation, letting students and families know what their responsibilities are in terms of returning devices is important. It plants that seed, which you can carry on throughout the year. There's various different methods of communicating, reaching out to students, whether it's email, changing the wallpaper on the Chromebooks is a pretty cool.
Yeah, I've seen some districts be very successful with that. We did some things like Spirit Week, and over the holidays, we changed the desktop wallpaper just for fun. And we knew right away that everybody saw it because I had a bunch of kids complaining that they couldn't change the wallpaper to whatever they wanted. So, I've talked about it on the podcast before. But yes, if you want to communicate, I mean, your Chromebooks are like these little billboards walking around your district. And that that wallpaper, that's right in front of them, and it's hard to miss. So I'll put an example in the show notes of a school that did this years ago. It just had a nice, background with a picture of a Chromebook. It says, hey, collection day. And then I love what you said, Dean, like a specific inventory, because it's not just a Chromebook. I also need the charger. And I'm terrified about the chargers because we had 12 extra chargers at the beginning of the school year, and now there are none. So I don't know where they went. And so, yeah, chargers are at home. They're under beds. Yeah, so we got to find the chargers and then the cases as well. And, I got kids who have been shoving papers into their cases. Like, hey, you got to clean those out. Like, get your stuff out of the case. I mean, we got half-eaten lunch shoved in the corners of those things. It's kind of gross.
Sounds like a lot of fun. One of the things I just wanted to add, sorry, John, if you don't mind, as Dean mentioned, sort of the eye of the storm, I think it's an important point here. One of the things, I just had a conversation yesterday with a tech director in Minnesota. He was mentioning to me that he's not really sure what he doesn't know. What I mean by that is, I think this is a good opportunity to, as Dean said, take stock, but in this case, not the literal sense, but take stock of what are the pain points? What are the challenges? What are the things that are causing me the most pain? Because we're already there, we're at the end game, we're only a week away. So maybe just pay attention. I recommend the idea of paying attention to what's going on and what the challenges are. Where are we missing things? And that will give you the opportunity to define what type of solution do I need to support those and then remove them and then support a process that will solve that problem, right? Like, is it the location? Is it the communication? Is it the condition of the Chromebooks? Is it, what is it that's causing me the most problem in this collection process, so that you can articulate that to, your sort of, small community of people that are going to be able to help you overcome those challenges next year. And what do I need to put into place in order to avoid that next year? That's kind of, I think, something that would be important for schools and districts to be looking at right now.
So for the school I'm working at, this week, well, next week really. So we'll be sending out emails to parents just saying, hey, this is what we're doing. We're going to be collecting devices on this date. Here's what we need. We'll send the email to students. We'll post, a desktop wallpaper kind of to really get it in their face. And then we'll also use social media, again, just to remind parents, the days leading up, hey, start looking for that Chrome. It's kind of like we and my family have a little bit of an issue with the local library because we have a lot of kids. We check out a lot of books. And so my wife knows, like, oh, library books are due on Friday. So everybody start looking for the missing one. Like, we know it's here somewhere. So start looking for the missing charger that we've been missing all year. It's time to dig that out of the couch cushions or wherever it may be. So we'll start doing those communications and getting ready for that. Now, Dean, you mentioned one of the keys is an accurate inventory. I mean, yes, that's, seems pretty self-explanatory, but it's so much more difficult to actually accomplish. You can say it, but doing it is much harder. Now, the reality is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, like, if you didn't inventory things when you passed them out, it's going to be real tough to figure that out now. But talk us through, like, what do you see as some of the best practices for inventory? So, like, Chromebooks have serial numbers. So, I mean, they are technically individually numbered. Those serial numbers are printed in microscopic print. So, seeing them is different. Adding asset tags, adding barcodes. I know some models of Chromebooks even have like a scannable QR code on the bottom. What do you recommend in terms of keeping that accurate inventory?
Yeah, I think that the key there is the word accurate. It's very easy to keep an inaccurate inventory. Jeff and I see plenty of those sort of heading to us in these giant spreadsheets. Keeping it accurate is really, I think, a process over time and over the school year. You need to consider all the points where the life cycle of a Chromebook changes and make sure that your inventory is reflecting those changes. Otherwise, your inventory is going to become inaccurate. So during repairs, make sure that if it's a swap out or a loaner, that's reflected in the inventory. The state of the device being in repair is reflected. The process of inventory in the devices, you mentioned serial numbers. So this is a little bit of a sort of hobby horse of mine. I've heard this a million times before. I really advise schools not to use serial numbers for their inventory. one of the issues with them is if you've got a knowledge base article, then the serial number, you're completely at the mercy of the vendor in terms of where that serial number is going to be on the device. So if you've got a knowledge base article, hey, it's going to be on the bottom right-hand corner, then your best case scenario, if the vendor changes their mind, is that there's nothing there. The worst case is that there's another number. There's all kinds of confusion going on. As you mentioned, they are tiny. They're prone to being damaged really easily, so they can't be scanned. We've had, this was interesting actually, a tech director called us up saying, hey, I'm scanning the serial number into VIZOR. So VIZOR can work with serial numbers. So we were scanning the serial number, but it was coming up with a different device. I was like, hey, that doesn't sound right. So we looked into it, and 2 weeks before, that device had gone into repair. So it went to a third party to repair, and they swapped out the logic board. So now the serial number on the bottom of the device didn't match the serial number on the logic board, which was reported into Google admin. So it's all out of sync. We work with serial numbers. We just tend not to recommend it. Barcodes are great for checking in, check out devices. They're really quick. You can buy a barcode scanner from Amazon, super cheap. The labels as well. We don't sell barcode labels, but you can buy them, again, super cheap, and build them into your process. So when you're bringing these devices back during the summer, then if you haven't got an asset tag, then you'll be able to get pre-printed asset tags, apply them to the devices after you've done your check, make sure they're in your inventory, whether that's one of those spreadsheets I mentioned or a tool like VIZOR, and then you're going to be in a really good place for the coming year. So, and that gives you flexibility. So you can put phone numbers on those. You can have tamper-proof holograms. So there's sort of plenty of options there in terms of your inventory and barcoding in particular. So but again, I think the key is to keep it accurate, build it into your process, and make sure that it's maintained over time. So whoever those stakeholders are, that they're updating the inventory during the check-in, during the checkout, during the repairs, every stage of the life cycle.
Yeah, I went super low tech for my fleet. I just got paint pens, and we just have numbers on them. And I always recommend putting that number in two places, because they do, no matter what you do, they will wear out. I don't know what kids do, but they wear off. So I do one on the top, kind of above the keyboard. That way I can just open it up and quickly see. Then I also put one on the bottom, so if it wears off, that the one on the bottom is less likely to rub off, but does require me to take it out of the case, which is annoying. So far they've lasted through the year. So part of the process this year will be probably reapplying those for any of that.
So it's your own sort of user-defined asset tag, essentially, is what you're.
It's just, I have a list of numbers, and then I assign the number to a kid, a student. Yeah, it's low tech, but it worked.
As long as there's an inventory, like have one, right? That's kind of step one, is to have one and keep it accurate. Step two, find a way that works for you, right? And I think that's kind of the idea, is that, sharing information like this gives other people ideas on what works for them. Some districts, that might not work, especially if it gets to be a size that's, it becomes
for larger,
unmanageable that way. But
we're a small district.
Yeah. But having something in place is what's most important.
Now, Dean, one of the problems, I definitely understand your reluctance to use the serial number as your inventory, but one of the challenges is the admin console you can't search by asset. And so, like, I can search by serial number and it'll pull that device up. Now, I'm guessing VIZOR probably would allow me to search by either. I would much rather search by asset ID. It's a lot faster. Numbers are a lot shorter, but it doesn't give me that option.
Yeah, sure. The Google Admin Console is a great tool in terms of managing those organizational units and policies, but there is shortcomings. So being able to find devices quickly is certainly one of the problems we're trying to solve, whether that's entering a student's name and seeing the devices allocated to that student, or a serial number, or part thereof of an asset tag if the other part has been wiped off. That's certainly what we're trying to do.
Yeah. All right. So step one is to prepare for your collection, communicating with stakeholders, preparing your inventory lists, coming up with your when are you going to collect them, where are you going to collect them, making sure that you've got enough physical space. That's always a challenge. Chromebooks take up a lot of space. You start collecting 1,000 Chromebooks and you realize that is a lot of stacks. And then moving those stacks from one place to another is no small feat either. So, coming up with that plan. So then we get to the actual device collection day. And Jeff, I know you work directly with a lot of customers. Maybe, I don't know if you've got any larger customers, what strategies are they using to, do this as efficiently? For me, we're trying to collect these, but school is still going on. So it has to be quick. I can't, I've got parents lined up outside to pick up kids. So I can't have a huge line of kids waiting to turn in Chromebooks, clogs up the parking lot, and kids get mad or parents get mad because now they're missing their, afternoon activities and things. So any strategies for efficiently collecting these devices?
It's going to sound overly simplistic, but the fact is that the quickest way to do it is have the kids drop off the devices and walk away, right? Without having to stand and wait and sort of, match something, like we said, serial numbers, trying to figure where that is and match it to a spreadsheet. The fastest way is just to allow them to drop it off and walk away. In my mind, that's kind of the quickest, most effective and efficient way. Not having it in multiple locations where each teacher has to gather certain, devices for their students and then bring them somewhere else, or worse is having students stand, like you said, in line. Well, not worse. I just mean to say, I think it's, not the most effective. So one of the most effective that I've heard is exactly that. Have the students just bring them in and drop them off. And then you have tech administrators or technical resources just being able to scan those devices and then bulk check them in. If you've got a proper inventory in place and you've got a system that's supporting that inventory, you know exactly which device belongs to which student, and they know what their responsibilities are, right? So part of a device that supports the Chromebook estate will have effective communication in terms of what are the consequences to improper care, or, if there are no consequences, kids can easily swap Chromebooks and no big deal kind of thing. If there are consequences, they understand why they can't do that. And so that whole process allows for a more effective and efficient collection process, if that makes sense. Because if they know this, if the Chromebooks are, we know who has what at all times, they can just drop it off and walk away. So there's no clogging, no lineups, and then you just scan all those and bulk check them in at once.
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess it really isn't necessary, kid hands you the Chromebook, you open it up, you make sure it turns on. You're going to do all of that, but you know who it's assigned to, so you can follow up potentially.
Another cool one. Sorry, John, I don't want to cut you off, but there was another cool part for me that was a district that I spoke to that did something that saved a lot of time as well. And that was they allowed their students, or they asked their students who seem to have a fun time doing this, to do a self-diagnostic of on the Chromebook themselves. So they have this checklist, essentially do this, have you got that? Try this, and all these different tests that they run. And then the results of those tests, the students themselves input. And actually VIZOR has a pretty neat way of gathering the results of those diagnostic tests and giving that information, pre-loading or front-loading the tech team with the results of those diagnostics, which is kind of cool too, because that saves, we're all about trying to save people time, and that saves the tech team an awful lot of time. And I think the students, they seem this district was, telling me how much fun the students seem to have with running these diagnostic tests and seeing the results of them and kind of comparing or talking about the results of their, what they did with their Chromebook versus another student or their friend. So yeah, that was kind of cool.
Nice. What kind of tests were they running? Like on device tests? Like, I don't even know, memory, RAM, battery health.
Yeah. So there was visual tests, like rate the condition of the Chromebooks, whatever on a scale of 1 to 10. But yeah, there were other other deeper dive diagnostic tests that were running. I don't remember. I don't have any ideas as to what specific.
That's interesting. Yeah, we definitely got some nerdy kids who enjoy.
Yeah. Well, they were just telling me about the comparisons. Like one kid was talking about what they, I don't know what the health of his device versus his friend, and her device wasn't as healthy as his, and that kind of thing. It was just kind of fun.
Oh boy, I would love for students to have a competition about who can keep their Chromebook the healthiest.
That'd be cool, right? There's an incentive that you can provide there. That would be pretty neat, right, for the students.
That is not my current condition. It's not where we're at. Something to aim for. So I want to chat about, you said, fastest way to collect them is just drop them off. And I think that strategy works with one exception. And this is something that all schools are really wrestling with. And I have yet to find a good solution for For reasons that I cannot explain, kids like to swap devices. And so the only problem I can see with kids just dropping them off is later on when I check it in, I wouldn't even know, like, Jeff and Dean swapped devices. And so now I'm coming after you, Jeff, because Dean broke it, but for some reason you guys swapped it. It just becomes a whole thing. Google does not, there is no way, to my knowledge, to easily restrict login to a single person. Like, I can lock it to my domain, but I can't lock it to a device. And like I said, kids swap. I have no idea why. Have you had districts chat about this? And do you have any recommendations?
Well, it's certainly something that I've heard. There's no question. You're right. That happens regularly. I think the one thing, and Dean, I'll let you sort of jump in, but the one thing that I can say is that if you have a proper inventory and have a well-established protocol and set of responsibilities for proper care and handling of devices, and that's well communicated to not only the students, but also the families, and they understand the consequences for non-adherence to those policies, I think that shrinks the likelihood of those exchanges. However, it's not going to eliminate it, and that's for sure. The other thing I think that VIZOR can provide, or a solution like VIZOR, I shouldn't pretend that it's the only one in the world, but there it is visibility to that, right? So if a student, if you have an idea as to who's logged into this device, when it's broken, there's an issue between Dean and Jeff in terms of whose device is this, but who checked it in. Well, we're going to see, right? The Google Admin Console is going to tell us who's logged in. So we'll be able to see that and at least make some determinations about at least the two entities that we need to be discussing this problem with. Ultimately, there's going to be one person responsible, and that's the person to whom you've checked that device out. That person and their family are responsible for it. But if you've, like I said, clearly communicated the consequences of not proper care, I think you'll mitigate that, certainly reduce that. Yeah.
Sure. Best you can. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Reconciliation, as Jeff mentioned, between what's in your inventory versus those recently logged on users. The communication again. If you send out an email via a distribution list, and that's going to be fairly blanket. One of the functions we have is where you can customize each of those return notifications for each of the students. So you can actually say, well, okay, this is the device we're expecting back. So you could put the serial number in there, but the make of the model, make it clear, and also where the device needs to be returned to. If you're a district with multiple schools, then a particular office or grade levels, if there's particular hold rooms where the device needs to go to. That personalization of the communication, which can be done through automation, can help there. But yeah, really, communication is key throughout. Bringing the families on board in terms of making them accountable and responsible for the devices, and doing that throughout the school year. And keeping it clear and concise. One of the issues we see so often with schools is that this information is buried in some terms of use documents, which no one ever reads. And we're really, like, social media is sort of a great place to do this, keeping it nice and concise in terms of what the expectations are and the potential ramifications as well, in terms of, well, if you swap a device, then hey, there's going to be a charge for that, but there's going to be an administration charge for dealing with that afterwards, and likewise for damages if it comes back damaged. Another thing we see during this sort of check-in phase is the peak of repairs shooting up, because all of a sudden Chromebooks come back and they're missing the space bar, or there's a crack in the case and things like that. But that's a damage which happened, maybe in January or whenever, and the students just dealt with it for the entire year. But if you communicate to families like, hey, go here, this is where you report any damage, this is how we're going to deal with that, this is like if there's a fee structure or how loaners are provided, being clear with that communication, make sure that you're not spending the whole of the summer putting space bars onto 100 Chromebooks.
Keyboards are the worst.
Yeah. Keyboards and screens, that's,
Screens are easy. I mean, screens I can do in like 10, 15 minutes. Keyboards, oh my gosh, you got to take everything out. It's like 75 screws. It's a process.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like fun.
You can tell what I've been doing all year.
Yeah, it's not 75, right, John? It's 76 screws exactly, because you counted it every time.
the one that you missed. That's always the challenge. Yeah. Well, that's good advice. I mean, Again, I'm not aware, and I've looked, of any way to really, in a technical fashion, prevent students from swapping devices. Unless Google adds something, there's no good way to do it. So you got to communicate it. Yeah, I mean, and it's in our terms of service, like you will not swap devices with another student. Don't let another kid do it. And if it breaks when someone else is using it, you're liable. So, but that's always the challenge. And look, I understand, there's the letter of the law, and then there's the parents who then complain because, well, my kid wasn't using it when it got broken, smashed, whatnot. But the better inventory and communication you have all year long, the easier that conversation will go. Like you said, Dean, if that policy is in place, but it's buried and no one read it, you're going to have a real, tough conversation. If it's been clearly communicated multiple times and explained and everybody knows it, they don't have as much of a grounds to stand on. All right, so we've got our devices back. Now, like I mentioned, we bought a whole bunch of extra chargers. And a kid forgets his, we loan them out, and they have slowly disappeared. One great benefit of VIZOR over just the admin console is that you guys can track anything, not just Chromebooks in inventory. So like I've got these 12 chargers, but they're not actually inventoried anywhere. I can't put those in the admin console. But you guys, you could do cameras, headphones, chargers, digital styluses if you were handing those out. Like, yeah. I mean, what kind of cool things have you seen other schools' inventory?
Yeah. So not only peripherals, which you mentioned, we've got softball nets, like sporting equipment.
Yeah.
A pretty cool thing is the ability to have policies. So when a device is checked in, that we're expecting the charger back. For this particular grade level, then they had a microphone as well. Or any students in this class, then they had particular camera equipment. You can form these policies to say, anybody which meets this criteria, these are the assets which they have, and therefore this is what we're expecting back.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, during repairs. So we have the ability to say, well, the Chromebook was returned with the charger and the case, so we can make sure that the charger and the case are returned back to the student. But yeah, very much on it's not just one asset, one student, the one-to-one. There's quite often multiple assets. So we saw during COVID, a lot of schools providing Wi-Fi routers, families keeping track of those. Another interesting use case, actually, which came out during COVID, was the ability to allow families to log into the self-service portal and acknowledge which assets they had. And that continues to be used today. Send out a communication a month or so before device collection to do that true up in terms of this is what our expectation is. Have you got these assets so you can be ahead of the curve there?
Yeah. So VIZOR has a lot of communication tools built into it. That's great. So it sounded like you could essentially do like a mail merge. So all the data fields in VIZOR can be inserted into these messages.
Yeah, absolutely. We have around 10 out of the box notifications covering the vast majority of scenarios. That you can create your own notifications. You can customize any of the notifications we have. There's lots of fields within VIZOR, and you can add any of those into a notification. And if you create a custom field, then you can add a custom field into a notification as well. A lot of the work we do with notifications is through integrations with the student information systems.
Okay.
So, the last thing you want is yet another place to maintain contact information.
Sure.
So continue to have your student information system as that central source of truth for all of the parent contact details. As new students arrive, they're onboarding on there, their contact information, and that just flows through sort of into VIZOR.
Yes, that's great. Last thing I need is another spot to update parent emails. Got it. Good. Nice. All right. So we've collected our devices. Dust settles. Now it's time to inventory them, look for damage, clean up and prepare the fleet for the next school year. Now, I'm guessing like the first thing that I would do is figure out who didn't turn them in. Like, which ones am I missing, or who didn't turn in a charger and whatnot? What advice do you have about those missing devices? Just never came back. How do we track them down?
Yeah, this is the $64,000 question, or
literally sometimes more.
Yeah. So there was a story this time last year, because this is when these stories come out. The school district in Virginia, and and they lost 1,800 devices, and that was a $250,000 in terms of loss there. But there's a few things you can do. Firstly, disable those devices. That tends to be a really good method of having a device returned. So within the Google Admin Console, you can disable a device. You can place a message in terms of where the device should be returned to and the reason it's been disabled. What we tend to see is that if the device is disabled and they receive an email with a fee, then there's a pretty good uptick in terms of the recovery of those devices. Try and have the communication with the family in terms of why the device wasn't returned. And again, this could be something which is done throughout the year. So maybe they're not returning the device because it has a broken spacebar and they're worried about the consequences of the repairs. Not only do you not want to do all these repairs during the summer, but if you know about that as soon as it happens, you make it really easy for families and students to report repairs, then your recovery at the end of the year, you're going to have less sort of missing devices. And likewise, they may have lost the device. And again, they haven't returned it because it's lost. If you communicate to the families, well, as soon as you lose the device, go to this self-service portal, report it as lost, and we will disable it and issue a replacement device. Yeah, exactly. So it's, again, this ongoing throughout the year, communicating and making it as easy as possible to do that. One of the features we have is a self-service portal where a family or a student on a Sunday evening can go and say, all right, I've lost this device. It will be automatically disabled within the Google Admin Console. We'll send them a confirmation email, let them know where to get a replacement. All these things cut down on the amount of devices which are going to be missing at that eye of the storm at the end of the year. But we speak to school districts all the time. They've lost 60 devices, and that's a loss of $20,000. And it more often than not, it just comes to the fact that there wasn't an inventory in place, there wasn't a process in place for managing the life cycle of those devices throughout the year, and it just becomes apparent.
I was going to just say that it's not always the families either, right? Oftentimes, in the what Dean's referencing there are districts of all sizes, all sorts of sizes that lose. It's a scale thing, right? If you lose 1 or 2 in a small district, that's expensive. If you lose 10 or 15 in a medium-sized district, that's expensive. If you lose like the 25,000 in a really large district, that's expensive, right? I mean, this is really, really big dollars that you're talking about, big percentages, but it's not always the families necessarily. It can be process, right? Gap in process. So for example, if you're not tracking and managing a very overlooked portion of the workflow of Chromebook devices, the repair process, right? If you're not tracking and managing that, if you don't have something in place to manage those devices while they're in their repair process, including when they go out to third party, like outsourcing repairs to third parties, that can be a big source of loss. Yeah. So if you're not closing that gap, that can be a really significant source of loss. So again, having a solution that can manage the entire workflow without gaps really, locks that down a little bit for you.
Right. So you're saying you got, 15 devices out for repair, and then you check them in and you're missing 15 devices. Well, you're not.
Exactly.
They're out for repair. But yes, just connecting the dots and understanding where those devices are.
And if the last status of the device is out for repair and that device never gets checked back in from the outsource, well, there's your gap filled, right? You know exactly where it is. Ultimately, knowing who's responsible at all steps and phases is what's most important. So again, you can just have somebody who's accountable and responsible so they can make sure that, if you're the responsible, then, you've got some skin in the game, right? So you're going to be a lot more diligent about ensuring that, your step in this process is fulfilled.
Sure. Yeah, even happens with teachers. They'll check out a Chromebook for something and then they forget to check it back in, and it's just sitting in a corner. No one's looking for it, so it is lost, but it's not gone. It just needs to be refound.
Yeah. So if you can scan that, if you can pick that up, bring it to the tech team, scan that asset code, the asset ID on that, you know exactly whose Chromebook that is, right? It opens it up in a management solution like VIZOR, and you see that. So yeah, you can get it back to the right person.
Yeah. One of the other things I like is the ability to see Chromebooks which haven't logged on recently. Mm-hmm. So those Chromebooks which are sitting in the corner, and you can say, okay, well, this is, firstly, you've identified those, and then you can see who had that Chromebook last and try and work out what's going on there.
Yep. Now, I've got an interesting one. I just got an email from a parent who has requested that their student be able to keep their Chromebook over the summer because the student is taking a dual enrollment class. So I've talked to our, head of school, and we're just like, oh, well, that's fine, I guess. Happy to do that. But we do need to develop a process for that. The one thing that we did decide is over the summer, the school is not going to take responsibility for managing or monitoring the device. So we're just going to open it up so that the student can log in with a personal Gmail account. And then it is the parent's responsibility to, manage and oversee that student's use of the device, and then obviously to return it at the school year. That brings us to, we need a policy. Like we need the parent to sign that policy. We need to make sure that device is noted, that it's not missing. It's been, checked out, and that's acceptable. And then in the fall, when we get it back, we need to put it back into the managed mode. So even this is a single device, which in some cases is the worst thing to do because it's a single policy that now I have to remember. I imagine that VIZOR would have a great, workflow solution for, special instances like this.
Essentially, it's an unmanaged asset if it's being removed from management within the Google Admin Console. We've had instances where there's been reluctance to return devices because it's the only device that particular student has access to. They haven't got a device at home, and that device is how they communicate with people. So it's kind of understandable that they don't want to give that up over the summer. Or, as you mentioned, the academic reasons why they need to keep that device. So yeah, keeping track of an unmanaged device, I'm not going to compare it to a softball net, but it's kind of like somewhat detached then, but it still remains within asset management within the system.
Yeah. So we've got our devices in, and then we're going to start slowly opening them up and making sure all the pieces and parts are still attached, and running updates. I did a whole episode this fall about the ability to do like a soft power wash, remotely soft power wash the devices, which is something that I will be doing this year. So, we've collected, the dust is settled, and we want to get ready for the fall. So that's what I'll be doing is, physically inspecting the devices, making any necessary repairs, replacing cases as needed. I will go ahead and do a soft power wash, so removing the student profile and then all of the local downloads. It just cleans out any junk and slowness. And so when they come back in the fall, they've got a fresh, clean, up-to-date version of Chrome to start with. Yeah. Any other tips and inventory strategies as we, prepare? I know it's hard to say, but prepare for the fall.
Yeah, I think this is a good time if you're not using asset tags to think about using those and place those onto devices. As you say, like doing those checks, make sure they're ready for state testing next year. The AUE date, depending on the tools you're using, then you should be aware of devices which are about to hit those dates anyway, but this is a chance to take those out of circulation. And, there's fun things you can do with Chromebooks at that point. So here's interesting programs in terms of recycling those devices, getting those out into the community. I think there is a question I think schools should ask themselves at this time of the year. Do we want and do we need all of these devices back for every grade level? So there's certainly maintenance things we need to do and checks we need to have in place. But to a certain degree, again, if you've got those policies running throughout the year, then doing repairs becomes less important over the summer and doing those checks because it's happening ongoing throughout the year. The same with the AUE date. You don't necessarily need to call every Chromebook back in. You can just call those Chromebooks back in, which are about to hit those, or Chromebooks which have had maybe more than 3 or 4 repairs within the year. So instead of like throwing an image of 1,000 Chromebooks within a gym hall, then you can maybe selectively think about what Chromebooks we need to come back in and what to do with those Chromebooks sort of during the summer. Again, that's a real policy and a decision for the school to make. There's certainly questions around safeguarding there. But we speak to a lot of districts where we have those conversations with them.
Jeff, do you see customers, school districts allowing students to just keep their devices over the summer if they don't need repairs, if they don't need, if they're not expiring?
Yeah, absolutely. There's districts that have policies in place and different distribution models and collection models for different levels, different grade levels. So often in the, the younger grade levels, they'll do one-to-one classrooms so that the kids have them just for the class and then they're bringing them back in. Middle schoolers, maybe they have a policy where they get a Chromebook at the beginning of the year and then they return it at the end of the year. And then there's more senior grade levels, perhaps they're keeping it for 2 or 3 years. In the case where they have to bring it back, obviously that's a different process. But yeah, no, there's lots of districts that have the students keep their devices and in fact, keep them permanently, right? So not only are they keeping them for the last 2 or 3 years, but once they leave the district, they're also keeping the devices. So that's an entirely different management style, management process. And there's a lot of, entirely different set of needs around those in terms of costs and removing it from accounting. That's where at that point, that's kind of what the most important components are. It's not so much getting it back and making sure that, we know how to replace it or power wash it or, remove the profiles and clean it up, things like that. It's really more about the accounting on that side, right? So there's more financials that are now involved in this management process. And so again, VIZOR's able to handle that for us as well, just in terms of being able to remove it from the inventory so that you're removing it from the overall value. It's one of the things that I love talking to tech directors about is, hey, you can tell your accounting folks that you can always give them a very accurate picture as to the overall value, the actual dollar value of your estate, because we're tracking and managing not only the costs at purchase, but the depreciation of those assets as well. And then when they leave the district, that's a really important thing to note, right? So yeah, VIZOR's got that ability too. So that's kind of one of the things that, from a not checking it back in, that opens up a different world of responsibility for the tech team.
Yeah. There's certainly all kinds of distribution models, as you mentioned. I think, Jeff, you mentioned an example recently where a school asked for the devices to come back in, but then always wanted to ensure that the same device went back to a particular student. And I think you said they're using that as a sort of a reward mechanism, to make sure that the maintenance of the device.
It was a bit of a carrot and a stick in that situation, right? So punishment for not proper care and then a reward for proper care. So that that is exactly right. They had to manage exactly which device was coming in from which student and ensuring that device was going back out to that same student. It's actually something that's in a process right now. So I'm not sure what the end result is going to be in terms of getting that device back into students, but there's 2 flavors there, right? A student can come to you and, you can scan that student's ID into VIZOR or just type that student's name, and that will tell you exactly what asset they should have. Or you can go from the asset side. You can just scan that asset and know exactly which student this asset now needs to go to. That's kind of options, and it's going to depend on the process and workflow of that particular district. So there's a set of processes that I think industry standards suggest this is the right way to do things, but every district is going to have their own unique, environmental variables and their own workflows. So having a system that can not only support those best practices, but also be configurable enough to support the individual needs of districts is really important. And then, proud to say that's something that VIZOR can do as well.
Yeah. To me, it seems similar to the difference between a loaner and a swap out during repair. So are we essentially taking this in, like to swap it out for a new device at the beginning of the school year, or, they're going to get that device back. So it's sort of maintaining that state. But yeah, I think having the schools explore why devices are coming in, what they're going to do with those devices is an important thing to do. And now's a great time of the year to be thinking about it.
Well, I fully support the idea of giving the same device to the same kid. I think that's a great accountability measure. It does require a little bit more attention to your inventory to making that possible. But that's my plan is. Yeah. And, the AUE date is a key piece of that as well. I mean, it follows a kid through their, you get 8 years of life out of an average Chromebook. And, by the time it's reached its 8th year, then it's ready to retire and you can give it to the kid. It's still usable, probably not in a school setting, but, you still check your email and browse the web with it. Tracking those AUE dates is really important. I had a district I work with this year. They were getting ready for state testing, and they kept calling me, and I was trying to help them out. He said, "Hey, I can't get these devices to update." Well, it turned out that he had a batch. I think he bought a batch within a larger order that had a shorter expiration date, and he knew about it. He just didn't pay attention to it. And so he's like, "Oh, gee, I didn't realize that those 300 devices, they won't update anymore." And so he had to scramble and, figure out a solution. But this is the time of year you need to look. Hopefully you're not discovering devices that are expired, because that's going to put you in a real bind. What you really need to be doing is saying, in the next year, how many of my devices are going to be expiring? I need to have a plan in place to replace them over the course of the 23-24 school year, so that next summer I pull those out and I've got my replacements. It takes a long time to get your funding and your ordering and get all that ready to go. So a tool, having an accurate inventory is critical to making these mid and longer term planning decisions. In the United States, a lot of schools, will pass bonds and then make major technology purchases. And depending on how you structure that bond, you can really get yourself in trouble, because if your entire fleet is expiring at once, that is just a massive project to pull and then replace. So it's much better to stagger, one grade at a time. Just physically moving those devices around is just such a challenge.
Yeah. Tracking funding sources is one of the key things we do to help schools in terms of how are these devices purchased, having a dashboard so you can see devices where they're coming up to the end of their warranty or AUE dates. So this isn't a surprise at the end of the school year. This is something which is ongoing throughout the year. We can see that these devices are kind of heading up to us, and we need to do something and plan for that.
Right. Now, a couple things that I'm going to be doing with my devices. We talked about power washing them, and that can be done through the admin console, which is really nice. The only caveat to that is the device does need to be powered on. So my plan is that I'm going to be opening devices up, physically inspecting them for damage, and then I will initiate the power wash command from the admin console. That device will, update and reset. I'll close it, set it aside. The other thing that I'm thinking about this year, I've never done this before, but Google does recommend putting devices into a deep sleep state for long-term storage. So if they're not going to be used for several months, you want to protect your battery longevity. Google does not recommend that you leave Chromebooks plugged in. Like if you have carts, they don't recommend that you're, soft charging them for 3 months. And they don't recommend, if you just close them, they still will drain and it will, degrade the battery life. Especially, again, it's not really bad for this year, but if you do that for 7-8 years, you will have a negative impact on your battery. So there is, and I had to look this up because, again, I've never done it. But what I'm planning on doing is inspect them for damage. I'll do the soft power wash. And then what you do is you have to, you plug the Chromebooks into power, and then you press the refresh and the power keys at the same time. And then you pull the power plug out of the side. And that triggers it triggers it to like shut down. It's the same as when you get a new Chromebook, they're in that deep sleep state. And so the battery is completely shut off. You don't have to physically remove it. That would be a ton of work. There's a lot of screws to get that done. And so now the battery will be conditioned appropriately. The only thing to be aware of is that in order to wake it up, you have to plug it back in. So we need to communicate to your students, like when you pass the devices out in the fall, you're gonna have to have a charger station set up because you have to just plug it in for like 5 seconds and then it wakes up and then it'll operate normally at full charge. Have you heard of schools doing that? I had to look up the instructions. That's kind of a new thing for me.
No, it sounds fairly totally new to me as well. I wonder, it'd be kind of interesting in terms of that scale of doing that to make sure, particularly that they reactivating those devices.
Yeah.
So otherwise, then it could be an interesting project, as Jeff mentioned, which there's sort of the more techie students could participate in disabling and enabling those.
Yep.
So I know that some schools, the long press on iPads to turn them off, so because you don't want them draining, and then you've got the younger kids who have trouble doing the long press and to turn them back on, and if you've got to do that 30 times in the classroom.
I hadn't heard of that either, deep sleep, but I can just imagine the number of help desk tickets that'll be open against, I can't open up my Chromebook. You know what I mean? Like, that's something you want to avoid for sure.
Yeah, putting it in deep sleep is, pretty straightforward because you're doing a lot of, checks and repairs and inventorying at the end of the year. But yes, at the beginning of the year, there's got to have to be a process. And I know a lot of larger districts will hire their, handful of techie students to do repairs, enroll new devices. That's great. That's a great way to give students some real hands-on experience. They can even get Chromebook certified if they're interested in careers in IT. I think that's a great way to do it. And this could certainly be something they could work on. Well, the end of the year seems like a great time to take stock of your processes. And if you are listening to this episode and are realizing that maybe your process is not ideal, VIZOR would be a great tool to consider. Obviously, I've been grateful for VIZOR support. I only work with companies that have great products and make your life easier, improve teaching and learning in the classroom. The whole idea here is to keep your devices in production so that teachers can use them to teach, and you're, as an IT person, not stressed out managing them and running around trying to make things work, but you can actually work to improve the process, not just cobble things together. Jeff, Dean, tell us if people are interested in learning more about VIZOR, where do we go, and any special offers you got running right now?
Yeah, so go to VIZOR.cloud/CBC for Chromebook Classroom. So VIZOR.cloud/CBC, then you can find out more. So there's information in terms of the features and what we do there. You can schedule a demo. So we love talking to school districts and showing them VIZOR. And yeah, with that particular address, then Jeff will fix you up with a wonderful discount. As I say, we like talking to school districts, finding out what problems they have, what we can do to help, hopefully. So yeah, if you check out our website, that's a good place. Over the summer is an excellent time to think about your processes, what you're doing, and make sure that you don't have some of these pains this time.
Yeah, I just add to that demo is great, but at this point, it's really a lot about, I like that you said that too, so I'm just going to highlight the idea of a discussion, right? So I love the ability to learn from different districts and then to pass on things that I've learned from one district to another. And so some of these discussions, this is really more of an opportunity, I think, to give thought to these types of things, discuss them, find out what is it that we can do, to improve the process for next year. That's kind of really all that's what I like about this type of initiative, is to be able to engage with districts and find out what their challenges are and just speak with them about, other districts' experiences with overcoming those same types of challenges.
And this, I imagine, would be a great time to get in touch with you guys. I think, Dean, you had told me in the past that the late summer is typically your busiest time of year because everybody's trying to get stuff going for the fall. So if you want to avoid that rush and make sure that you're not stressed out putting things in place for the fall, start the conversation now, especially while these pain points are fresh in your mind, so that you can set up a system to avoid that in the year. And you'll be ready for device distribution in the spring.
A whole other podcast, a whole other topic, right? We talk about collection, but the other side of that is distribution back into August. And, yeah, there it is.
Well, Jeff, Dean, thanks so much for hanging out with me. Again, thanks for the support of the podcast. Appreciate it. You guys are great partners. You got a great product that I think can benefit a lot of schools. So yeah, I'd encourage everybody to check out VIZOR, VIZOR.cloud/CBC. That'll get you where you need to go, and then also tells these guys that, hey, people actually do, in fact, listen to this podcast, which is great. Thanks, everybody. Good luck on collecting your devices. Hope it goes well. If you have any questions or stories that you want to tell, we love stories. Hit me up on Twitter and let us know what's going on. You can tag VIZOR. Dean, you're pretty active on social media. Jeff, I don't know if I've seen you as much.
I'm a little too old school. I'll just say I'm too busy for social media. How about that?
There you go. He's busy working. So good. Well, thanks everybody for listening to the Chromebook Classroom podcast. Appreciate your support. We'll see you back here next time.